Can I take off my coat, if you don't mind? So we can say that I wore a suit here, but I just didn't wear it for the whole speech. Okay. Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to kick this off. I had a couple of hours of sleep last night. I came in from Tokyo. And I can't pretend, unfortunately, to answer the theme that I said that I was going to speak about, which is essentially what kinds of businesses Southeast Asia can thrive at. Because the more I tried to learn about what was going on here in Malaysia, I've spent a little bit of time in Singapore, the more I realize how little I actually know. What I can do is share a little bit about my experience and kind of share the latest buzz and sense of what's driving the Silicon Valley economy. So first about me. Okay. So you can find me just at Seth. I was one of the first, I guess I was the first Seth on Twitter to get the name. There's a lot of Seths. Maybe it's not as popular a name here, but in the States there's Seth Godin, the marketer. There's Seth Rogen, the comedian. Seth MacFarlane. There's a handful of them, but I am at Seth. I get a lot of mentions, and I think I'm very popular, but really most of the traffic is for like when there's a new Seth Rogen movie that opens up. And when all that happened with Korea, it was disaster. I thought I was very, very in the middle of all of that, but it was really him. So some of my roles, I've been mostly a co-founder and CEO of startups, which is the most harrowing, least stable job one can have, but it's been consistent. I started my first company when I was 19 or 20. I'm 44 now. I'm 45 now. I turned 45. So I've been doing it for more than 20 years. And I started with CD-ROMs. Does anybody remember CD-ROM before the internet? Little plastic discs. And I just happened to really be there. I was in New York in 1994, 1995, when the web essentially became commercial, right? It went from being a research project or a science project, and in New York, it was really about the impact on magazines and newspapers. It wasn't a video medium. It wasn't a, it didn't have all the breadth and the complexity that it has now. But I was there, and I was a recent college grad, and my focus was on advertising and how could the internet. I remember we won the business. I was working at Condé Nast, which is a big magazine company, and Duracell, the battery company, was looking for an agency of record. And so I had some friends who were working at different places, and at night we worked on a presentation, and I played hooky. I took a day off of work. We went to Connecticut. We won the business. I got fired from my job because I was using the color printer to print the presentation. I didn't know if I got the job, the Duracell job, and they told me a couple weeks later that we got the business. And it was a $240,000 contract, and we got 40%. I remember all these details. We got 40% of it up front, and I went and got a bunch of computers, and we started the company. And on some level, I'm still doing that. I love that. It's like gambling, but I'm gambling on myself, the risk of leveraging up, trying to do something extraordinary, trying to win a big contract, trying to raise capital. I was in Japan the past few days having meetings for my startup. And I hate it because I'm so dependent upon somebody else's approval. But it's also what drives me, right? And so whether you're raising capital or you're trying to get a contract, for me it's about putting myself out there and taking chances. It's harder as I get, I want to say it's harder as I get older, but it's easier in some ways. I always had a problem of being too far ahead, so I'm older, I get slower, so I'm not as far ahead. But I love being David to David and Goliath. I love disrupting industries. I love challenging companies. It's an addiction and a sickness and a strength, all in one. My first focus was on advertising. In '95, I did some of the first online ads. Back when banners had, I remember 30% click-through rates, because no one had seen them before. I don't know what the current rate of banner click-throughs are, but it's probably 0.5% or 0.1%. They've become real commodities. And I think about the internet and the interactivity and the on-demand nature of the internet as something that's really just pervaded so many sectors of our economy and of our cultures. Advertising was one of the first. When the bubble burst in first bubble, 2001, 2002, I'd been a venture capitalist in New York at Flatiron Partners, which was a great venture firm, and a great investor named Fred Wilson was my mentor. And we had an investment in a tracking company called ComScore. And ComScore is a market research panel. So it sees over the shoulders of 1 million people. And I remember I didn't know what I was going to do because I was a fantastic venture capitalist in 1999. And then I was a terrible venture capitalist in 2000 because I made a lot of money and then I lost a lot of money. It really was just where you are in the curve. Anyway, ComScore had all this data, and we realized there was a lot of hedge funds and mutual funds on Wall Street that were very sophisticated with technology, but didn't know how to find data about the companies. So imagine you're a hedge fund manager and you invest $200 million in eBay, but you don't know anything during the quarter. eBay, the public companies in the United States, they report once a quarter. It used to be that if you knew the CFO and you could golf with him or her, you get a little something and you'd hear how they're going to meet or not meet their quarter. But back then, things really start to crack down. It had to become very, very, there's all sorts of legal issues with regulation, fair disclosure. That was the name of the legislation. And it meant the companies couldn't say something to one investor without saying it to all investors. Anyway, so I had access to this data, and we started to make research for hedge funds and mutual funds based on internet data. So if I saw enough users online, I could see maybe how Amazon was going to do that quarter, right? Or I could track how many listings eBay had. And that was very, very valuable information. And so I applied the internet to Wall Street. There's a company called Majestic Research, and we sold that business in 2010 for about $75 million. And most recently, as Cheryl said, I've been focusing on music, which is, trying to think of a nice way of putting it. Investors hate music because of licensing and because of the music industry and the labels. It used to be that way with local. Local was seen as a graveyard. No one could make money on local. But then Yelp happened and some companies kind of started to figure it out. Music is interesting because it's so passionate. And more music is listened to than ever. I have a 13 and a 16-year-old boy, and I can see how music is not going away. But people want to consume and interact with it differently, and I felt that music really hasn't been innovated. Even though there's things like Spotify, it still remains like a jukebox. I hit a button, I get a piece of music. And I'll show you towards the end of this kind of what I'm working on. But that's what I've been focused on. I'm not an advertising person, I'm not a Wall Street investor, I'm not a musician. But I really went pretty hard at all of them as an entrepreneur, right? I've been a venture capitalist and an entrepreneur in residence. I'm an angel investor and advisor. I love helping startups. I'm much better at helping them than helping myself. I'm better at helping you raise money than helping me raise money. It's always that case. I'm a dad as well. So I want to do three things. I want to sort of touch at some of the emotional realities of being an entrepreneur, and hopefully it will resonate with you. I want to address strategic and technical strategies of what's happening in technology, where important places to focus. And then I figured maybe I'll end by just showing you kind of how I pitch my company and how I tell that story, which I hope brings some of these things together. As I was preparing for today, I went through some of Cheryl's blogs, and I'm sure you lifted this from somebody as well, but I thought it was really great. When having difficult conversations, start with I feel rather than you didn't do or why did you. You build empathy when you start from sharing how you feel, and the conversation starts from a more constructive tone. I think that's a really important statement, not just when you're firing somebody. I think in life, I remember counseling somebody years ago who was trying to leave a company. And her boss was somebody that she really, really admired and really respected. And like a lot of CEOs, her boss was a total narcissist and did not want to hear anything other than she wanted to hear. And so I said, to my friend, I said, just, start by just holding your chest and saying how you feel. Because you can't, nobody can debate you, right, if it's a feeling. And I think as entrepreneurs, too often we get caught up in the logic or the business plan, the projections, and you get out of your comfort zone, and your comfort zone is the feeling. So why be an entrepreneur? Why start something? Really, right? Because you can't work for anybody else. How many people feel that way? Right? So, as we say, you want to turn a bug into a feature. I am unmanageable. I am really difficult. I'm stubborn. I selectively focus on the things I want to focus on. I mean, all these traits come in handy as an entrepreneur, but are difficult as a person. I think that because you have something to prove, like I look to hire people who have a chip on their shoulder, who have been wronged, who have been slighted. Either their parents didn't spend enough time with them, or they got fired from a job. But and then a third, it comes back to empathy, because you need to be needed, right? You want to be liked, you want to be accepted, you want to be recognized, and it's a neediness and it's an insecurity. But I think when you put these things together, even though you can look at these as character flaws, they become a very human entrepreneur, particularly if you can admit it. If you can tell the investor you're meeting with or tell the person you're trying to hire, someone asks you, okay, where are you going to be in 3 years? What's your goal in 5 years? And to be able to say, I don't know, convincingly, because the investor knows that you don't know. They're really looking for, what they want to hear is, and I talk about this in the book, is, you know what, I don't know, but here's how I think we're going to get there. And here's the team I've put together to help me figure it out. And I can't promise anything, but I'm going to die trying. Right? So they want candor, they want honesty, but they don't need all the answers. Don't work on depends who you're talking to, but like business plans I don't think are that useful. It's tricky when you're dealing with investors or potential partners that are keyed off of that. How many users, how much revenue, and you get into their logic. It's a dangerous place to be because you just start slipping and slipping and slipping, and pretty soon, it's hard enough to be you. It's much harder to try to be someone else's version of you. So I think about entrepreneurs, we do these things. We start things. As we start something, we find meaning in it. We take chances. And I don't know if there's a better way of putting this, but we breathe the brand. We become the brand. So when I put those two slides together, why and kind of what, that's my image of an entrepreneur right now. That's me. That's how I feel. That's why I get up in the morning. That's why I do this. I have a lot to prove. And the more someone tells me no, and the more times I get rejected, I have to reflect on that. And I wish there was a simple answer for, I was with biking with a friend a year ago or so, and he was the CEO of a public internet company, and I was having a hard time raising capital for my company. And he said, well, maybe the market's telling you something. Maybe you shouldn't raise money for this. And here I am killing myself, putting more of my money into this. And you get to that point and you're like, door A is the schmuck that keeps putting his own money, doesn't listen to what his friends and smart people are saying, and fails, and should have known better and should have listened. Door B is the one, Elon Musk did it with a couple of his companies even before Tesla. Just like, I don't want to swear, but just says, I don't care what you say. I'm going to do this. I'm going to see this through. And in Silicon Valley, there's so much capital and there's so many venture capital firms. It's hard to imagine somebody really good with a business really good not getting funded. Something must be wrong. How can all these amazing venture capitalists be wrong in not funding you or not supporting you? In terms of what it is, I think about it as an inevitable solution to a problem that's getting bigger. So what to start? What's your business? So who here thinks of themselves as an entrepreneur, founder, CEO, startup? Raise your hand, come on. Okay. Are you working on a solution that in your mind is inevitable? Someone's going to do it. And you're working on a solution to a problem that's getting bigger. I'm seeing heads kind of, yeah. I mean, like, I don't know how to reduce it any more than that. I know for me right now with Crossfader, I think about it that everybody wants to be a DJ. Every kid wants to be a DJ. More and more of them around the world. And it's inevitable that you're going to want to DJ on your phone and not on a computer, right? So someone's going to figure that out. Someone's going to make a mobile DJ platform, and more people want to do it. So I have to have that kind of level of grandeur, right? That's my vision. Okay, so those are some of the emotional things. And now I want to go through technically how I look at the market. And if anybody wants to stop me at any time to drill down, I'm happy to. And as I was putting together some of the notes for the keynote to send in advance, I thought, well, let's think about these waves of technology, innovation, and revolution. Okay, the first one, 1995, 20 years ago, we had the web, we had these canonical companies, Netscape, Yahoo, Amazon, and by new dial tone, I mean suddenly the internet world's available to us through our desktops, through the browser. 10 years later, mobile picks up. We have Google, we have Facebook as the canonical companies. And arguably, it's about information and identity. Google's information, Facebook's identity. And now we can move through the internet with Facebook Connect, with a host of Google services. And now this third wave is pervasive. Computers are everywhere. It's our watches, it's our cars, it's our tablets, it's our Fitbit. We have companies like Uber, Airbnb in particular, Kickstarter, and it's about something else, right? It's about trust and sharing. So if you think from dial tone, which is almost like infrastructure, and then you have an identity layer and an information layer, now we're at this trust and sharing layer, and what is that about? I was trying to think for Southeast Asia, if we're competing in this world of trust and sharing and hospitality and services and relationships, it's no longer about who's able to compress the most packets, right? We're competing in a different kind of way. And so I was starting to think, well, what are some of the opportunities here to not just take an innovation in Silicon Valley and make it work here, but to actually come up with new models. And what has Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, what have some of these companies been historically able to do uniquely? And how can that translate here? And then I didn't have the answers, so I started to focus on Silicon Valley. The platforms that I'm most interested in and that seem to be the most robust that I would focus on building for, Snapchat's really important in the States. And I put Line at the bottom because I was in Japan, and I know there's WeChat. We have Instagram, Google, Facebook. There's certain platforms I don't have here, but you have to decide when you have very few resources what you're going to build for, because you can't support all the devices and you can't support all the platforms. And even though you can fairly easily share something across lots of platforms, it's always better to go deep in one. It's a big decision. We decided with Crossfader, iOS only. Only iPhones, no Android. It was the right decision so far. There's examples where it might maybe make sense the other way. But Twitter was very important as a platform a few years ago. It's not as important now. Snapchat's going to be more important. Also, experiences. We know TED. How many people have seen a TED talk? Okay, how many people have gone to TED? Okay, TED, not TEDx, but TED, in Monterey. Wow, okay, nobody. Well, that one, okay. TED's a good example. I first went in the 90s, late 90s, when it was Richard Saul Wurman before it got flipped to Chris Johnson. It was a crazy experience. It was this guy with a white hair and a beard and crazy sweaters and scarves, and he had an amazing assortment of individuals. It wasn't Bill Clinton and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, but I remember having dinner with Herbie Hancock and Bran Farron and Danny Hillis and some just really, really interesting people. It was small. There was no webcasting. But what's interesting here is that ethos, has been translated, right? We have a sense of what TED is as an experience. Who's been to Burning Man? Okay, I know Dev, I don't know if he's here, but he just got back last night. Burning Man similarly, right? Who's been to EDC, Electric Daisy Carnival, Las Vegas, South by Southwest, right? So these are my reference points. You probably have your own. But think about experiences like platforms, right? And we're trying to, so we use Slack in my office. Who uses Slack here? Slack's a great tool. The best platforms and the best tools are thinking about how to make more of an experience, even just reflecting it in the software. Okay, so for the hot and not hot, what I think about hot. Apple iPhone 6 Plus. Who has a 6 Plus? Okay, big iPhones. It's sort of the tab, the iPads go away. More and more big iPhones, 3D entertainment, Oculus, HoloLens, Magic Leap. I'm going to the Oculus conference in a couple weeks in LA. It's becoming important. I think there's a tipping point coming maybe in this Christmas, early next year. I think what drones were, and they're still growing, but what they were a year ago, I think 3D entertainment is now. I hear more and more of it. Live streaming. Again, we have Meerkat, we have Periscope, we have Facebook Live. I'm sure there are pure plays here. Google iOS apps. I'm not a big fan of Android. I know it's bigger as a platform, but I don't think it gives you the depth for developers to create unique experiences. But the Google iOS is kind of their Trojan horse, where it seems to me that Google's doing a better job of creating software for iPhone than Apple is. Netflix and Slack, what's not so hot? Apple Music and Apple Watch. The music is interesting. It's obviously something I focus on. In the case of Apple, they bought Beats Music as an app. It's actually embedded in their operating system. And if a month ago or so, reason why we all had these problems is because the music kernel wasn't working. It was screwing up the operating system, right? If Apple were to take the music app outside of its operating system as a standalone app, it probably wouldn't be so popular, right? So you're seeing just new kinds of platform wars, kind of like when Microsoft, used to say that Office, you couldn't unbundle Office. We're seeing that now. How How many people bought an Apple Watch? Okay. The conventional wisdom was, wait a minute, it's just the first version. The second version is going to be much better. Stay focused on it, develop for it. I don't see it happening. Again, Android is a personal decision that we've made not to support Android. I'd say the most creative developers that I know, that I see in the Valley, are all building iOS apps. And Twitter, again, Twitter is fighting for its life as a public company. It's not a development platform the way it was. It used to be there was Twitter and Facebook, and you could support OAuthing via Twitter or Facebook Connect. It's not even really a question as much anymore. So boiling all this down, what is a modern product? Well, I think about features and products and companies. So Uber is worth $50 billion, conceivably, right? What is Uber? Uber, technically, it's a single screen that you open up and you hit a button, and a car picks you up, right? So that feature within a feature, that feature is the product, is the company. It's not doing 17 things. It's very, very, very specific. So I like companies and startups that do one thing very, very, very well. Persistence, you're always logged in. Location aware, the service knows where you are and can feed that back to you. And by little brothers, I think about, it's not about a big brother watching you, it's about lots of little brothers that you want to watch you, right? I want you to know I want this device to know my password. I want this app to know what websites I've most recently gone to. You want to be able to selectively share your history. I think when you put those together, you can be competitive. Of what you're working on, who feels like they're in this kinds of space? If you're working on the enterprise side, maybe not as much. Who's working on consumer-facing companies? Who's working on enterprise, business to business? Hardware? Mobile? Education? Fintech? Okay. Investors? That's a good mix. So next I was going to talk about CrossFitter to kind of show you how I feel in my day-to-day. But before I do that, any questions, comments? Does this resonate? I know it's early in the morning. Yeah? Okay. So here's my dog food. You have to eat your own dog food. I have 5 minutes left. Okay. Here's a story I tell about what I do. This is CrossFader. I think about this, again, back to this idea of inevitable. So 2003 was the era of the download. iTunes, you download music. 5 years later, it was about streaming, and streaming was the dominant metaphor. And I believe that remixing is going to be the new reality for music. Okay? So already here, what I'm doing is clearly I'm putting myself in the same, I'm putting my logo just as big as Apple and Spotify. I'm not saying we're going to be as big as them, but emotionally, psychologically, I'm saying we've got that big opportunity in front of us. What's the next thing I do? What Tumblr did for blogs, So if you think about, it used to be to write a blog post, you had to write all this code, and then Tumblr comes around and makes it really easy. What you see is what you get, right? That the interface is visual. Instagram did for photos. Used to be with Photoshop, was really, really hard, right? Instagram made it easy. I didn't need to know, Instagram took 2% of the functionality of Photoshop and made it their entire product. And instead of having 1 million customers, they have 500 million. So now you can think about what I'm going to do next. Look, Crossfader does for music. So again, I'm like saying Tumblr, Instagram, Crossfader. This is how it works. You just DJ and mix by moving your phone. We've been featured 5 times by the App Store. Every time we've launched a new version, we've gotten featured. You can't buy that. You can't buy ads in the App Store. And clearly, beyond the first time is more than luck. And I don't have a brother or sister that works at Apple either. Thanks to Apple, we're global. We're all over the place. 19,000, actually we're over 20,000 cities. I have real users that really care about this service. It changes their life when they use it. It's a creative tool. Here are my metrics for the last 30 days. How many sessions, how many unique users, how many new users. And here's my goal. 5 years, we want to be the biggest interactive music service in the world. And we've got a great team. Thank you. So. That's my story. I think we have some time for a question or two. No? I think no questions, but you can find me. I'll be around the next couple of days. Thank you very much.